Module number 17. Screen print, line work. Apparatus and materials. Stretch vinyl mesh or screen as the matrix, dark room, exposing box, light box, squeegee, photo emulsion and synthesizer. Use our 3-color image for printing, G-clamp, screen printing inks, bowls, spatula, printing table, masking tape, thinner and reducer. Screen printing is a printing technique where a mesh is used to transfer ink onto a substrate except in areas made impermeable to the ink by a blocking stencil. A blade or squeegee is moved across the screen to fill the open mesh apertures with ink, and a reverse stroke then causes the screen to touch the substrate momentarily along a line of contact. This causes the ink to wet the substrate and be pulled out of the mesh apertures as the screen springs back after the blade has passed. Screen printing is also a stencil method of printmaking in which a design is imposed on a screen of polyester or other fine mesh, with blank areas coated with an impermeable substance. Ink is forced into the mesh openings by the fill blade or squeegee and by wetting the substrate, transferred onto the printing surface during the squeegee stroke. Screen printing is a form of stencilizing that first appeared in a recognizable form in China during the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 AD. It was then adopted by other Asian countries like Japan and was further refined by creating newer methods. Screen printing was largely introduced to Western Europe from Asia, sometimes in the late 18th century, but did not gain large acceptance or use in Europe until silk mesh was more available from trade from the East and a profitable outlet for the medium discovered. Screen printing is also a stencil method of printmaking in which a design is imposed on a screen of polyester or other fine mesh, with blank areas coated with an impermeable substance. Ink is forced into the mesh openings by the fill blade or squeegee and by wetting the substrate, transferred onto the printing surface during the squeegee stroke. As the screen rebounds away from the substrate, the ink remains on the substrate. It is also known as silkscreen, screen, serigraphy, and serigraph printing. One color is printed at a time, so several screens can be used to produce a multicolored image or design. There are various terms used for what is essentially the same technique. Traditionally, the process was called screen printing or silk screen printing because silk was used in the process prior to the invention of polyester mesh. Currently, synthetic threads are commonly used in the screen printing process. The most popular mesh in general use is made of polyester. There are special use mesh material of nylon and stainless steel available to the screen printer. There are also different types of mesh sizes which will determine the outcome and look of the finished design on the material. Screen printing was introduced to Western Europe from Asia in the late 18th century but did not gain large acceptance or use in Europe until silk mesh was more available for trade from the East and a profitable outlet for the medium discovered. Early in the 1910s, several printers experimenting with photoreactive chemicals used the well-known actinic light, activated cross-linking, or hardening traits of potassium, sodium, or ammonium chromate and dichromate chemicals with glues and gelatin compounds. Roy Beck, Charles Peter, and Edward Owens studied and experimented with chromic acids, salt, synthesized emulsions for photoreactive stencils. This trio of developers would prove to revolutionize the commercial screen printing industry by introducing photo-imaged stencils to the industry, though the acceptance of this method would take many years. Commercial screen printing now uses synthesizers for safer and less toxic than bichromates. Currently, there are large selections of pre-synthesized and user-mixed synthesized emulsion chemicals for creating photoreactive stencils. A group of artists who later formed the National Serigraphic Society coined the word serigraphy in the 1930s to differentiate the artistic application of screen printing from the industrial use of the process. Serigraphy is a word formed from Latin sericum, silk, and Greek graphein, to write or draw. Make sure the emulsion on the screen is completely dry on both sides before attempting to begin. Artwork. Print out. The inked surface has to be turned towards the emulsion on the screen. Do not turn on the lights as the screen is still light sensitive. The screen has to be laid down on the glass of light table or sunlight duration for exposing to light box. Carefully keep the screen frame on the artwork transparency and with proper pressure. Ensure there is even contact between the screen and the artwork. In 1907, Samuel Simon patented screen printing in England. At first, the process was used to print interesting colors and patterns on wallpaper and fabrics and then by advertisers. Eventually, however, it was adopted by artists as a convenient and reliable way of reproducing their works. In today's contemporary world, screen printing is used by fine artists along with commercial printers who use graphic screen printing to place images on t-shirts, DVDs, glass, paper, metal, and wood. In the 1930s, a group of artists who wanted to differentiate what they did from the commercial world formed the National Serigraphic Society. In doing so, they linked the word serigraphy with fine arts and screen printing. In recent history, the pop artists are generally seen to have popularized the form of screen printing known as serigraphy. Pop artists took their images from the world of mass culture, so it was appropriate that they used a technique known for its mass production ability. Pop artists would value the use of the medium, finding it suited their aesthetics. Screen printing is arguably the most versatile of all printing processes. Since rudimentary screen printing materials are affordable and readily available, it has been used frequently in underground settings and subcultures. And the non-professional look of such DIY culture screen prints have become a significant cultural aesthetic seen on movie posters, record album covers, flyers, shirts, commercial fonts, in advertising, in artwork, and elsewhere. In the 1960s, first Eduardo Paolizzi and then Andy Warhol began to use screen printing as a fine art technique. Many artists have used the medium to reproduce imagery appropriated from popular culture and challenge ideas about what could be art. Contemporary artists like Ryan McGuinness follow in their footsteps. In screen printing, the screen is first created by stretching a fabric, example silk, over a frame of wood or aluminium. The image is first drawn manually or with software on a piece of paper or plastic or captured in a photograph. Then it is cut out to form a stencil. Next, the stencil is attached to the screen. Then areas of the screen mesh are blocked with a waterproof masking medium. These areas become the negative areas of the final image. The screen is then placed over the desired substrate, example paper, glass, textile, and ink is then applied to the top of the screen and spread across the screen, over the stencil and through the open mesh onto the substrate underneath. The ink is spread using a squeegee, a rubber plate usually the same width as the screen. The unblocked area is where the ink filters through and creates the image. Any number of colors can be used, although a separate screen is required for each color. The stencil designs are generally created using software programs like Adobe Illustrator or CorelDRAW. The designs are then printed on clear vellum, which is referred to as the film positive. Although screen printing is in principle a simple stencil process, the kinds of images which can be produced cover a wide spectrum. Depending on the stencil used, the artist can produce a range of effects from broad, simple areas to fine, detailed, even photographic images. This wide range is broadened further by the use of various combinations of transparent and opaque colors and by printing on various kinds of paper. The stencils are printed sequentially one color at a time, one over the other. Each color is printed in turn on all copies in the edition before the next color is applied. Thus, the size of the edition cannot be increased after the second stencil has been printed, assuming that the stencils are destroyed after each printing, which is usually the case. Now it is time to prepare the photosensitive solution. Mix 3 parts PVA, 1 part synthesizer properly. Now coat the screen clothes with this solution evenly and dry this in the dark room. The screen once coated with the solution is extremely sensitive to light, hence be very careful to leave it to dry in the dark room. Because screen printing was a preferred medium of the op artist, it became the predominant printmaking technique in the 1960s and 1970s. Important artists of that time were Henry Sternberg, Roy Lichtenstein, Andy Warhol, Robert Indiana, Nicholas Krushnik, Victor Vasarely, Joseph Albus, R.B. Kitaj, Robert Rauschenberg, Richard Hamilton, and many others. Artist Helen Frankenthaler. Artist, sculptor, and printmaker Helen Frankenthaler is an influential figure in American art of the late 1950s and early 1960s. Born in 1928 in New York, Frankenthaler was known to have a leaning towards the arts when her parents enrolled her in progressive experimental schools. At 15, she attended the Dalton School, originally called the Children's University School. There, she studied art under Mexican painter and muralist Rufino Tamayo, 1899 to 1991. At 16, she enrolled in Bennington College, Vermont, where she studied painting under Paul Feely, 1910 to 66. Feely was instrumental in Bennington becoming a cultural outpost for the New York art world, and he regularly organized exhibitions of abstract expressionism. In 1948, Frankenthaler moved back to New York, and in 1950, she met the art critic Clement Greenberg at the Bennington Alumni Exhibition. Through this association, she was introduced to abstract painters such as Jackson Pollock (1912 to 1956), Lee Kranzer (1908 to 1984), Franz Kleen (1910 to 1962), and William D. Kooning (1904 to 1997). She was also encouraged by Greenberg to study under Hans Hofmann (1880 to 1966), but she was known more to be impressed particularly by Jackson Pollock. She adopted his style of drip paintings to a further note by using the technique of pouring very thin paint onto canvas like washes and stains of watercolor. 1952 was a pivotal year for Frankenthaler. After a trip to Nova Scotia, she painted her mountains and sea, pioneering her color stain painting technique. Carefully select one screen, complete with a wooden frame and a stretched screen cloth. The size of this matrix for this assignment is 7 inches into 7 inches. Working with a large canvas on the floor, the artist thinned her oil paints with turpentine and poured directly onto the canvas. Although it was oil paint, the effect was like watercolor. The unprepared canvas absorbed the colors, sometimes causing a halo effect. This technique, known as soak stain, was also used by Pollock. It particularly impressed Kenneth Noland (1924 to 2010) and Maurice Lewis (1912 to 1962) when they visited Frankenthaler's studio in 1955, and in doing so helped launch a second generation of color field painters. The original pioneers of color field painting being Mark Rothko (1903 to 17) and Barnett Newman (1905 to 70) in the 1940s and 50s. Unfortunately, the soak stain technique has proven a headache for art curators as the oil in the paint comes into direct contact with untreated canvas and eventually rots it. Throughout the 1950s, Frankenthaler continued to paint and exhibit, drawing inspiration from her love of landscape. In 1957, she married contemporary artist Robert Motherwell, a relationship which lasted 13 years and proved beneficial to both artists' creative development. Note: although seen as an important contemporary female artist, Frankenthaler was uninvolved in the feminist art movement that emerged in America during the late 1960s. While coating the screen, make a thin, smooth, even coating on both sides on the screen, trying to avoid drips and runs. Health and safety precaution. Cleanliness and orderliness. Cleanliness and orderliness is very important to the screen printing process. Besides it's impacting the overall bottom line by keeping individual ink color from being contaminated, for example, it also may prevent injuries. Carefully keep the screen frame on the artwork transparency and with proper pressure. Ensure there is even contact between the screen and the artwork. Be sure to have designated places for all your inks, equipments, and tools to be stored. Spend less time locating missing tools or equipment and avoid tripping over misplaced buckets and cuts stemming from misplaced razor blades or knives. Now place the screen in the dark room to dry out. The inked surface artwork has to be turned towards the immersion on the screen. Do not turn on the lights as the screen is still light sensitive. Make sure the immersion on the screen is completely dry on both sides before attempting to begin. Clean the screen frame with water immediately. Chemical safety precautions. Many chemicals are used in and around the screen printing process. Many of these chemicals are solvents used to clean screens, spills, and equipment, while others are mixed into the ink to increase or lessen its viscosity. Since chemicals can be inhaled or absorbed through the skin, use any solvents in well ventilated areas only and wear gloves where necessary. The screen has to be laid down on the glass of the light table for exposing to light box, or if you are in outdoor environment, expose the outwork in the direction of sunlight. It is a good idea to use preventive measures that protect your eyes, skin and nose to prevent inhalation when handling chemicals. Read the labels of any chemicals to determine which safety precautions you should take. A product's material safety data sheet (MSDS) also lists first aid measures and more safety instructions. Equipment safety training. If a workplace has any electronic equipment, be it a flash cure unit, dryer, or automatic printing machine, each person should be trained on how to safely use it. Be sure that the machines also have the necessary safety guards or covers in place so that the engine parts are not exposed. Stay alert. Many accidents happen in the workplace due to lack of alertness or common sense. To help combat tiredness or drowsiness, take breaks and stay hydrated. Moving or walking around also will help energize the mind and body. Keep distractions to a minimum when working in a fast paced environment, especially around automated equipment. Cover the inner corner of the screen frame with cello tape. This is now ready for printing. Prepare the ink to be used and apply it on the screen and pull the squeegee softly with color. The color will pass through the cloth onto the paper. Whether the distraction comes in the form of music, cell phones, computers, or interaction with other co-workers, minimize distractions to focus on the task at hand. Mark the final print on the final paper and take the edition.